Tonight we delve into the darker side of the holiday season. Christmas Eve, for most, is a time of joy, but for others, it can be a time of profound isolation, where the silence of a winter night can echo with something far more sinister than sleigh bells. Tonight, we have one such tale, a true story submitted by Alex, who found themselves alone, far from home, on a Christmas Eve that would haunt them for years. Alex worked at a small motel and gas station off a desolate highway. It was one of those places that saw more truckers than vacationers. That year, Alex drew the short straw, working overnight on Christmas Eve. The owner, Frank, apologized. Everyone else had family. Alex, new to the area, hadn't minded much at first. Boy, were they wrong. Snow started falling around sundown. Thick flakes quickly blanketed the highway. By 9 p.m., the world outside was a silent, white expanse. Only the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional crackle of Frank's two-way radio broke the silence. Alex had served the few customers. By 10, it was just Alex and the falling snow. The motel office connected to the mini-mart. Around 11 p.m., the first odd thing happened. Lights flickered throughout the building. Alex shrugged, assuming old wiring or snow. The generator seemed fine. Returning to the mini-mart, Alex poured coffee. The bell above the door chimed. No one was there. Alex peered through the frosted glass. Nothing in the snowy parking lot. The distinct jingle now felt horribly out of place. Goosebumps pricked Alex's arms. Probably just the wind, they muttered, but the door was shut, no strong gust. Alex tried to focus on their book, but an unsettling feeling had settled. Every creak, every gust made them jump. Then muffled footsteps seemed to come from the motel hallway leading to the guest rooms. Alex froze. The motel was supposed to be empty. Frank confirmed it. No cars. The footsteps stopped outside the hallway door, then moved on, slowly. Alex grabbed the heavy iron poker. Clutching it, heart pounding, they crept to the door, straining to hear. Silence. Just the refrigerator's hum. Alex slowly pushed the door open, peering into the dark corridor. Nothing. But a chill, colder than the winter air, enveloped them. Just as Alex retreated, a low guttural growl echoed from the far end of the hallway, near room number 7. Not human, not quite animal. It vibrated through the floorboards. Alex slammed the door shut, locking it with a trembling hand, stumbling back behind the counter, poker still clutched. They stared wide-eyed, convinced something was on the other side. The rest of the night was a blur of terror. Alex stayed glued to the mini-mart, never venturing near the hallway. Frank's cell went straight to voicemail. The radio crackled static. Shadows seemed to shift. They swore they saw a dark shape pressed against the frosty gas station window, fleetingly, before it vanished. Lights stayed on full blast, a desperate attempt to ward off the darkness. Sun finally peeked over the horizon. Frank arrived shortly after 6 a.m., his truck crunching through snow. He found Alex pale, shivering, refusing to leave the mini-mart. Alex recounted the night's events in a rush. Frank, usually skeptical, listened grimly. When Alex mentioned the growl from room 7, Frank's eyes widened. He said nothing, just walked down the hallway, key in hand, and unlocked room 7. The door swung open to reveal an empty room. Then Frank pointed to the window. It was slightly ajar, despite sub-zero temperatures, and the snow on the sill inside was disturbed. Faint, unidentifiable drag marks led from that window towards the thick woods behind the motel. Alex never worked another Christmas Eve shift. Frank sold the motel a few months later, citing retirement. To this day, Alex doesn't know what was in room 7 that Christmas Eve. But they know one thing. Some things are better left unexplained, especially when the world is silent and covered in fresh, white snow. And some Christmas traditions are better broken. The first story comes to us from a viewer named Sarah, who recounted a Christmas Eve tradition that took a turn for the truly horrifying. Sarah lived in a small, close-knit town nestled in the foothills, where snow fell reliably every December. Her family had a cherished ritual. On Christmas Eve after dinner, they would drive out to a particular clearing deep in the woods, just beyond the town limits, to hang homemade ornaments on a specific, towering pine tree. It was a beautiful, slightly quirky tradition, a way to connect with nature and the spirit of the season away from the commercial hustle. Every year, without fail, they'd bundle up, pack a thermos of hot chocolate, and make the short drive. This particular Christmas Eve, Sarah was 16. Her younger brother, 10-year-old Jake, was beside himself with excitement, bouncing in the back seat. Their parents, always stoic but clearly enjoying the simple joy, drove the old family SUV. The snow had been falling steadily all day, blanketing the winding, unpaved road that led to their special tree. As they drove deeper into the woods, the silence grew, broken only by the crunch of tires on fresh snow and the gentle hum of the engine. The bare branches of the surrounding trees seemed heavy with white, seemed to reach out like skeletal fingers against the darkening twilight sky. They found their tree, a magnificent pine standing solitary in the clearing, its branches already laden with years of family memories. As they began to hang their new ornaments, a painted wooden snowman, a glittering star, a clay reindeer, a strange feeling began to settle over Sarah. The air, usually crisp and invigorating, felt heavy, almost suffocating. A profound stillness had descended. Even the chirping of unseen insects that sometimes persisted in the cold was absent. It was the kind of silence that felt like a scream waiting to happen. Jake, usually boisterous, was unusually quiet, his eyes wide as he looked around. "Mom, Dad," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the soft swish of snow from an overloaded branch. "Do you hear that?" Their parents paused, listening. Sarah listened too, straining her ears. At first, nothing. Then, a faint, rhythmic thumping sound, barely perceptible, seemed to vibrate through the soles of her boots. It wasn't the sound of an animal, nor the wind. It was too regular, too deliberate. "It's probably just the snow settling, honey," her dad said, trying to sound reassuring, but his gaze darted uneasily into the deepening shadows between the trees. The thumping grew louder, closer. It sounded like something heavy, dragging itself, or perhaps being dragged across the frozen ground. And then a new sound joined it, a low, guttural growl that seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere at once. It wasn't an animal's growl. It was too deep, too malevolent, filled with a primal hunger that sent a shiver of pure terror down Sarah's spine. Her mom, ever the protector, quickly gathered Jake close. "Okay, everyone, let's just finish up quickly and head back to the car," she said, her voice tight with a fear she was trying to mask. But it was too late. From the dense cluster of pines on the far side of the clearing, a figure emerged. It wasn't human. It was tall, impossibly thin, its limbs elongated and twisted at unnatural angles. Its skin, if it had any, was a mottled gray-brown, covered in what looked like desiccated moss or decaying bark. But the most horrifying thing was its head, a grotesque parody of a deer skull, with jagged, broken antlers that seemed to glow faintly in the gloom, and two dark, empty sockets where eyes should be. A thin, wet, black tongue flickered from where a mouth would be, tasting the air. It moved with a horrifying, jerky gait, each step accompanied by the thumping sound they had heard earlier. In one of its elongated, clawed hands, it clutched something. As it drew closer, Sarah's blood ran cold. It was a small, tattered red stocking, like one you'd hang by a fireplace. And tied to the top of it, with a piece of twine, was a child's tooth. The creature stopped at the edge of the clearing, its skull face tilted as if studying them. The growl intensified, a vibrating rumble that seemed to shake the very snow from the branches. Sarah's dad, with a burst of courage, grabbed her and Jake, shoving them towards the car. "Run! Get in the car!" he roared, his voice cracking with fear. Her mom was already fumbling with the car keys, her hands shaking so violently she could barely insert them into the lock. As they scrambled into the SUV, Sarah risked a glance back. The creature had taken a step forward, its head still tilted, its empty eye sockets fixed on them. It wasn't running, it wasn't charging. It was simply advancing with an agonizing slowness that was far more terrifying than any sprint. The engine roared to life, and her dad slammed the SUV into reverse, spinning the tires in the snow. As they tore out of the clearing, Sarah looked back again, pressing her face against the cold glass. The last thing she saw, before the trees swallowed it from view, was the creature standing exactly where they had been, beneath their special Christmas tree. It raised the tattered red stocking, holding it up as if in a grotesque toast, and the low growl echoed through the silent, snow-filled woods. They never went back to that clearing. To this day, the sight of a lone pine tree against a winter sky, or the scent of fir, brings back the icy dread of that Christmas Eve, a reminder that some holiday traditions are better left undisturbed. Our next story comes from Michael, who experienced something truly unsettling during a holiday visit to his estranged aunt's remote cabin. Michael had always found his Aunt Beatrice a bit peculiar. She lived in isolation, deep in the Appalachian Mountains, in a cabin that had been in their family for generations. It was a place steeped in local folklore and whispered legends, none of which Michael had ever taken seriously. But when his mother insisted he visit Beatrice for Christmas, hoping to mend old family rifts, he reluctantly agreed. It was supposed to be a quiet, reflective holiday. He arrived on Christmas Eve, the winding, unmaintained road to the cabin barely passable due to recent heavy snowfall. The cabin itself was old, weathered wood, dark against the pristine white landscape. A single, weak light glowed from a window. Aunt Beatrice, frail and wiry, greeted him with a surprisingly warm hug. The cabin inside was cozy, if a little cluttered, filled with antique furniture and the scent of wood smoke and dried herbs. They ate a simple dinner, exchanged polite conversation, and then Michael retired to the guest room, a small space with a creaky bed and a window overlooking the snow-covered forest. He awoke sometime in the dead of night, not to a sound, but to a profound sense of cold. Despite the roaring fire in the main hearth, his room felt like an icebox. He shivered, pulling the thick quilt tighter. Then he heard it, a soft, rhythmic scratching coming from directly outside his window.
It wasn't like an animal, not a branch. It was too deliberate, too persistent, like fingernails, long and sharp, dragging across the window pane. Michael sat bolt upright, his heart pounding. He told himself it was just a branch, heavy with snow, brushing against the glass. But the scratching sound was accompanied by something else, a faint, almost imperceptible clicking, like bones rubbing together. He held his breath, straining to listen. The scratching continued, moving slowly from one side of the window to the other, then back again. It felt like something was testing the window, trying to find a way in. He wanted to get up, to look, but a paralyzing fear rooted him to the spot. He remembered his mother's old warnings about the forest folk and the things that wander on cold nights, tales he'd always dismissed as superstitious nonsense. Now, in the suffocating darkness of the remote cabin, those old stories felt terrifyingly real.
The scratching stopped, replaced by an even more unsettling silence. Michael counted to 10, then 20, his breath catching in his throat. Nothing. He slowly began to relax, convincing himself it was his imagination, fueled by the isolation and the old cabin's atmosphere. Then, a low, guttural moan echoed from directly outside the window. It wasn't human, yet it held a distinct note of agony and hunger. It was long, drawn out, and filled with a despair that sent ice through Michael's veins. He clamped his hands over his mouth to stifle a cry. What was out there? The moan died down, replaced by a series of soft, ragged breaths, almost like wheezing. He heard a faint thud from the living room, then his aunt's voice, hushed and urgent. "Go away, you old wretch. There's nothing for you here tonight." Her voice was laced with a fear Michael had never heard from her before. Then, the distinct sound of something being dragged across the wooden floor. Michael heard his aunt mutter something under her breath, a phrase he couldn't quite make out, but it sounded ancient, like a chant or a prayer. He heard the metallic clang of a shovel hitting stone, then the rhythmic thud, thud, thud of earth being moved. Panic seized him. What was his aunt doing? What was she burying in the middle of Christmas night? He crept out of bed, careful not to make a sound on the creaky floorboards. He peered through the crack in his bedroom door, his heart hammering against his ribs. The living room was dim, lit only by the dying embers in the fireplace, casting long, dancing shadows. Aunt Beatrice was nowhere to be seen, but the front door was slightly ajar, letting in a bitter gust of wind that made the curtains billow. Driven by a morbid curiosity and a growing terror, Michael crept to the door and peered outside. The snow had started falling again, thick, heavy flakes swirling in the beam of Aunt Beatrice's flashlight. She was standing a few yards from the cabin, near a small, ancient-looking shed, shoveling vigorously at the freshly fallen snow, clearing a patch of ground. As he watched, she plunged the shovel into the earth, but it wasn't earth. It was a mound of frozen, disturbed soil that looked like it had been freshly dug up, and sticking out from the top of the mound, half buried, was a gnarled, skeletal hand. Michael gasped, a strangled sound that caught in his throat. Aunt Beatrice froze, then slowly turned her head. Her face, illuminated by the bobbing flashlight, was pale and gaunt, her eyes wide with a desperate fear. "Michael," she whispered, her voice a ragged gasp. "Go away inside. Don't look." But it was too late. As the light shifted, Michael saw more. The hand was attached to a thin, emaciated arm, draped in what looked like rotting remnants of old fabric. and next to the grave, partially obscured by a fresh flurry of snow, were a pair of old, tarnished jingle bells lying on the ground. Not the cheerful kind, but the heavy, dull kind that belonged to some forgotten, macabre tradition. Suddenly, the guttural moan from earlier returned, closer now, emanating from somewhere within the disturbed mound of earth. The skeletal hand twitched. Aunt Beatrice let out a small whimper, then, with surprising speed for her age, began frantically shoveling the disturbed earth back over the visible hand, burying it again. She was burying something alive, or perhaps something that refused to stay buried. Michael didn't wait. He stumbled backward, slamming the door shut, locking it with shaking hands. He spent the rest of Christmas Eve huddled in his room, listening to the muffled thuds and scrapes from outside, and the increasingly frantic sounds of his aunt working in the freezing cold. He left at dawn on Christmas Day without a word, never looking back. He never spoke to his Aunt Beatrice again, and to this day, the sound of jingle bells, especially dull, metallic ones, fills him with an unspeakable dread. Our final story comes from Emily, who shared a chilling memory from her childhood Christmas. Emily was 8 years old, and Christmas was her absolute favorite time of year. Her family lived in a quaint old Victorian house, famous in their small town for its elaborate holiday decorations. Every year, her dad would string hundreds of lights, her mom would bake dozens of cookies, and their home would transform into a winter wonderland. This particular Christmas, Emily was more excited than usual. Her dad had bought a massive, real Christmas tree, so tall it almost scraped the ceiling. It took days to decorate, and the scent of pine filled every room. On Christmas Eve, after they had finished decorating, the family sat around the fireplace, sipping hot chocolate and telling stories. Emily eventually fell asleep on the rug, dreaming of Santa Claus and presents. She awoke suddenly, sometime in the middle of the night, to an overwhelming sense of cold, a cold that felt unnatural and piercing, as if it were seeping into her very bones. The living room, usually so warm and inviting, was now bathed in an eerie, pale moonlight filtering through the tall windows. The Christmas tree, with its twinkling lights, was the only source of cheer in the otherwise unsettling silence. Then she saw it. Standing perfectly still, directly in front of their beautifully decorated Christmas tree, was a figure. It was tall and slender, draped in what looked like an old, dark cloak. Its head was bowed, obscuring its face, but Emily could sense its presence, a heavy, suffocating weight in the room. Her first thought was that it was her dad, checking on the tree, but something about its posture, its stillness, felt wrong. Her dad always made noise, always hummed a little tune. She watched, transfixed by a mixture of curiosity and a growing fear. The figure didn't move for what felt like an eternity. Then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, it raised its head. Emily's breath hitched in her throat. Where a face should have been, there was only a featureless, smooth, pale expanse. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. Just an expanse of stark white, like polished bone or ancient marble. It was utterly devoid of human features, yet it exuded an undeniable, sinister sentience.
As it raised its head, its arms, which had been hidden beneath the cloak,
slowly extended. Its hands were long, delicate, and skeletal, with fingers that seemed to stretch and writhe like pale worms. And from each of these fingers, something dangled. Tiny, almost invisible strands, like spider silk, each connected to one of the ornaments on the Christmas tree. Emily watched in horror as the figure's fingers twitched, and with each twitch, a tiny, glowing spark would arc down the invisible strand and settle onto an ornament. As the sparks touched the ornaments, they would briefly glow with an unnatural, sickly green light, and then, for a split second, Emily could have sworn she heard faint, tormented whispers emanating from within them, like tiny, trapped voices screaming. She wanted to scream, to run, to wake her parents, but she was frozen, unable to move, unable to make a sound. The creature continued its grotesque ritual, slowly moving its long, bony fingers, plucking at the invisible threads, charging each ornament with its strange green energy. The air in the room grew colder, thick with a metallic tang, like old blood and ozone. The whispers from the ornaments grew slightly louder, a cacophony of tiny, barely audible laments. Then the creature turned its featureless face towards her. Emily felt a wave of pure, absolute terror wash over her. It wasn't just looking, it was seeing. It was perceiving her, acknowledging her presence with a terrifying, silent awareness. She could feel its gaze, a hollow, penetrating sensation that seemed to strip away her very soul. She squeezed her eyes shut, wishing she could disappear, wishing it was all a terrible dream. When she finally dared to open her eyes again, the figure was gone. The living room was quiet, the moonlight still streaming through the windows, the Christmas tree still twinkling with its festive lights. But the cold remained, and a faint, acrid smell lingered in the air. She never told her parents what she saw. Who would believe her? Every Christmas after that, decorating the tree filled her with a profound, unshakable dread. She would always feel the eyes on her, the invisible strands, the faint whispers that only she could hear. And sometimes, late on Christmas Eve when the house was silent and dark, she would catch the faint, sickly green glow from a randomly selected ornament, a silent, chilling reminder that something unholy visited her home every year, not to bring gifts, but to collect something far more precious.